Welcome to Off Panel. Yo everybody, welcome to Off Panel. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is a lawyer for creators in comics, film, TV, and more who represents some of the comic industry's biggest names. It's Caitlin DiMotta. Thanks for coming on, Caitlin.
Thank you for having me, David. I appreciate it.
So the reason I wanted to have you on the show, Caitlin, was to talk about comic contracts and some of the things that people might need to know as they're getting into the world of comics and just kind of your general role, because frankly, I don't feel like I understand exactly what you do, and I certainly don't think the average person understands what you do. And but before getting into that, I wanted to start at the beginning for you. So let's start with kind of like a 2-for-1. What was the path you took, to getting into a career in law, and what was it that appealed to you about getting down, said path?
Well, my path began in a really weird place. It began because I started dancing as a ballet dancer for the first part of my life. I started dancing when I was 3, and then went on to perform in the first professional production ever when I was 9.
Wow.
And then at that moment, I knew I'd found it. I had found the thing that I was good at and the thing that I loved more than anything else in the world. And so I was a professional dancer from that first time until I was 23 years old. And, through that process of, dancing professionally for companies, and then I went to a performing arts boarding school. And when I graduated from boarding school, I had a choice to make. Do I go to, some conservatory program? Do I go to normal college? Like, what do I do? Or do I just say screw it and not go at all? And I kind of took the latter two options. I went to Chicago. I got into the dance community there. I danced professionally there for, started in 97, and then, so a good 6-7 years was mainly in Chicago. And I went to college at night and on the weekends, and I specifically took other things I had never been exposed to before, because my life was so wrapped around dance. I mean, I cannot underscore how focused you have to be as a young artist in that field. It's a young person's game, and you really have to put everything you have into it, and everything else is second. Education, I know my mom's going to cringe when she hears that, but education is second. Boys were totally non-existent. Social life was way down at the bottom of the list. You have to sacrifice all those things to be great and to dance. And so what I realized, though, as I was building my professional career, and I was very young, like I said, I was 17, and then, I realized as I moved through that community that there were so many things that I didn't know. And I felt it was like I knew that there was something I didn't know, and like there was a savviness and a sophistication that I just didn't have, but like I didn't really know what it was. And so I started kind of when I went to college at night and on the weekends, like I kind of was drawn naturally to classes that I just had never taken before. I was really good at math for some dumb reason, who knows. I'm really good at physics. I was really, I was not as into taking English classes, or, I wasn't as into that. I was into things that, like forensic chemistry, shit that I had never done before or seen before or even experienced. And ultimately, I think at some point in that process, I might have taken a class about regulation and law in advertising, something random like that. And then, back to my real life, like in my dance life, I was freelancing, I was dancing for companies, I was signing contracts, and I realized, I think at some point in that process, that I was signing things contracts, and I had no idea what any of them said.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea what any of them meant. And I think almost as importantly, I'd never actually been told. I'd never taken a class. I'd never been instructed as to how the business of dance worked.
Mm-hmm.
I had a very elite education, and I never once did any institution that I attended, as a dancer, say, "Hey guys, here's how to read a contract.
Yeah.
Here's how a union works, and this is what you're going to be expected to know, when you get into that next level in your career. This is what you're going to need to know. This is how advocacy works.
Mm-hmm.
This is how problem solving. This is negotiation. None of that. Nothing." And I really felt that was sort of that ephemeral thing that I was missing.
Mm-hmm.
That there was something that everybody else seemed to know and I didn't know. So it actually really started to crystallize in a very weird way. I was dancing for a friend of mine who I had been dancing in a company with, and he decided to break off and start his own. He asked me to dance for him, and I was delighted to. And then because I was a founding member of the company, and I was the only one in that founding group who had gone to college, he said, "Hey, would you mind doing the 501c3 paperwork, getting us our tax-exempt status?" Which sounds like Greek. And trust me, it felt like Greek. So
you got the most glamorous position in the company.
Yeah, right. And I was like, "Sure, of course, buddy, whatever. I'll do whatever." And so I had no idea what he was asking me to do. And but that didn't stop me. I called the Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts in Chicago,
mm-hmm.
which will always have a really soft place in my heart. And I attended 3, 4 seminars of how to do exactly this, that they put on for artists and performers in the city of Chicago, and of how to do basic stuff like this.
Mm-hmm. And
I did it. And we got our exemption. And I remember sitting in a coffee shop going through, and mind you, this may have been 2000.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was not even close to how complex it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me 3 months to do it. And I could do it in a day now. And I remember sitting there going, somebody has to go to frickin' law school. This is stupid. And my friend looked at me and said, you might to think about it. I mean, why not? And that moment, if I really think about it, was the seed. And of course I laughed at her and I said, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I'm going to dance forever,
Yeah.
But that was really the moment where I started for the first time ever, and I'm not kidding, ever, thinking, I've never, done anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I've never done anything different. And what would it even take to be a lawyer? I mean, that's stupid. Lawyers are wear suits and stuff. And I have piercings and tattoos and that's not me. That doesn't look like me. I don't look like them. Their lives are boring. That was the moment though, where
mm-hmm.
when the first time I ever considered doing anything differently with my life. And, and then looking back on it, it all sort of contracts, the time really contracts,
mm-hmm.
Things seem very A, B, C. I went to, took this test and then I got into places and blah. But it was a lot of, small decisions and very dark moments, but I was approaching the end of my career around 23.
Mm-hmm.
I got injured. And then I feel like once the injury got better, I felt like the thing that made me a really great performer, I started getting paranoid that I had lost that because all of a sudden I had gotten injured. So it's that sort of thing where it kind of eats at your confidence. And I thought, well, I'm not as exciting to watch because now I'm actually afraid of getting hurt again, and which may or may not have been true, but that's how I felt.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's sort of a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And I just thought, maybe it is time to do something different. And there were a lot of dark moments where I was like, I don't know if I can do anything else. I've never been good at anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, I can't say that I was wrong in thinking that. I mean, I literally at 23, I've never been good at anything else. And it was it was a risk, but at the same time, like, I was 23,
Mm-hmm.
like, you can make mistakes at 23. Like, you can make mistakes at any age, but like, I mean, whatever, like, it's fine. So yeah, I took the LSAT and I got a great score, and I thought, well, that was weird. How'd that happen? And then I applied to some law schools, and I think my entrance essay was literally about this, about how how I wanted to take what I know, the language I know so well, the language I speak, which is the language of being an artist,
Mm-hmm.
and to like connect those dots and to figure out how to help other artists like me, and there's a personality component too. I mean, there is a part of my personality that's always been, defiant, and I don't really have any trouble speaking up and making my voice heard. And, some of my friends in dance, often tease me that I was like the Norma Ray. Like, if there was an issue, they'd be like, she can do it, but why don't you say it? Like, you speak for us. And I was happy to do that. I felt much more comfortable advocating for myself when I could also advocate for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seemed kind of a natural fit for me to spend the rest of my, my next phase of my professional life advocating for other people.
Yeah.
And so it made sense. Like, the more I kept thinking about it, the more it made sense. And then, frankly, by the time I got into law school, I was in class with all these kids who, I'm not kidding, have never been bad at anything academic in their life. And it's so funny because, I mean, I was good at academics, but, like, who gives a shit? And to me, it was, like, totally secondary to, like I said, my mother's going to have a heart attack when she hears this. But it was really secondary. Like, it wasn't my thing. But I got into a class with, an academic setting with a bunch of people who've never received a B in their life, and they get wrapped around their own axle because, like, oh my God, I got to be I mean, it's such a different, it was such a different environment for me, and I felt no issues whatsoever in, like, I don't mind looking dumb. To me, it's like, I don't care. It's like, it's weird, but I don't mind looking stupid because I feel like that's really just your perception anyway. And I don't, if it occurred to you, it's probably occurred to somebody else in the room. And also, from my experience, no one was calling me fat. So it was fine, Like, the teachers weren't going to call me a fat cow. So, like, but compared to ballet, it was cakewalk.
Yeah.
You go through law school and you sort of, my guiding principle at all times was, art, entertainment, nonprofit, particularly nonprofit. I'm really focused as much as I possibly could when electives were possible. I really took art and, intellectual property electives and nonprofit stuff because I feel like that, everyone, it's noble to go to law school to help the little people and to be like, I'm going to do criminal defense. But the reality of working in criminal defense is very different. And, same thing with, like, with anything else. You can go in and be like, I'm going to make as much money as humanly possible. That's fine. You can do that. But my focus in law school was, I'm going to take the classes that I feel like I wish I had more knowledge. Like, I wanted that I really had in my mind a sort of focus, these are the kinds of things I want to know. I want to be able to do a 501c3 application in a half a day.
Yeah.
That's what I want. It can't be that hard, right?
Yeah.
And so that sort of guided me. And then, all of a sudden at 26, I was being sworn into the New Mexico bar.
That is
literally
awesome.
On my birthday.
Oh.
On my 26th birthday, I was sworn into the New Mexico bar.
That is an amazing birthday present.
Yeah, it was. It was pretty great. It was pretty cool. And so then, I practiced in Santa Fe, New Mexico, at a beautiful firm. with like this under the supervision of this amazing attorney named Lenny Katz, and he it was great. And then I think my path really started there, like the of how I got to comics. I think started there.
Well, one thing that just kind of listening to your story, I mean, it's a very organic path. But one thing that's really nice about what you're doing is you have kind of the best of both worlds, because I have a friend who's a probation officer, and she has to deal with some really just like horrible stuff, and like that stuff kind of weighs on you. So it's like you can help the little guy without having to work in kind of that dark place, while still like I mean, it kind of seems like you can still help the little guy without having to go to those dark places, which seems really appealing to me, because I don't know how I could handle that. Like that might feel like that stuff would haunt me, and I would always take work home with me mentally, and being able to help artists and everything like that with things that they may not understand, because frankly, listening to your story when you're talking about when you were in ballet and you didn't know about contracts and you didn't know about all these different things. It really it sounded eerily similar to some comic creators I've talked to who went to places like SCAD or, all different kinds of art schools, and they just never were told these things. And when you were first getting into working with comic creators, I know you're married to somebody who was and is a comic creator. Was it partially, like that natural inclination because you got a connection there, and it mixed with, there was just opportunity, and there was lots of, people weren't armed with this information. Was that kind of how you first started getting into comics?
It wasn't. It was more of the former than the latter. I had no idea how much or to what degree that the comics community needed any sort of help in this, or to what degree, maybe it's not even that, to what degree the comics community wasn't even aware of, had the same problems that the dancers have, right? It was like the knowledge in dance, the knowledge is sort of reserved for a very small, like a very elite few, and if you're not part of that sort of in the know group, in that control power group, then you're out. I had no idea how similar comics is to that, or and I think it also was a convergence of incredible good timing.
Yeah.
Because, and I think that the reason that I have carved my own path in this industry and reached people the way that I have is because I do get it. Like I totally get it. And I try to tell my clients all the time, and even other, not just my clients, but it doesn't make you dumb. It makes you like, it just is. Like if you don't understand how the business of your industry works, it doesn't say anything about you. It says about, then it's a path of like what you need to learn. Because you can exist and have a career in any industry, dance, comics, whatever, knowing nothing.
Right.
And just doing your art and just doing your thing and just plowing. Like you totally can have a great career. It's not a requirement, but you have to be really lucky to never get the sharp end of that stick.
Right.
You have to be really lucky, because I just don't think that most of us aren't that lucky. Most of us at some point in our career will run into a time when we're like, how did that happen? I thought you were my friend. Like, how did that happen? I don't know how, and we end up feeling very dumb about signing something or trusting someone, or and that's the part that I felt really spoke to me about the comics industry, is that you don't have to feel dumb. It's not about that. You shouldn't. Those things happen, and even when you know what's happening, even when you know more, those things still can happen. But it's how you process when those bad things happen and how you do things differently later. That's what matters.
Right.
And so I do think that I was drawn to comics, not because of, I think I saw the parallel between my own experience and the comics experience. I saw that later. For me, it was much more random. My husband and I moved from Santa Fe. We moved to Seattle, Washington in 2008,
Mm-hmm.
And so when we got there, I had a bar license in New Mexico, and every time you move to a new state, you have to take the bar exam again, which takes 5 years off of my life, and I've now taken 3 states. And so, those 15 years, good things are the diaper years. But, we moved to Seattle in 2008, and a friend of my husband's knew the creator Ed Brubaker really well.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, when you move up to Seattle, you should call Ed because he's really great and you'll love him. You should they'll be a friend. And neither of us, my husband was writing, at the time he was writing screenplays. He was a writer, but, he wrote spec screenplays.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't write comics. And we moved there. We met Ed and his wife, Mel, and they became like family to us, and they are like family to us now. And Ed, that Ed and my husband really, based their friendship creatively. Ed read some of Duffy's screenplays and was like, you should write comics. This is a great way to be a working writer, to get paid, to make a good living, but then sort of, while you're developing other stuff on spec. And so Duffy was like, okay, great. And so he said, okay, I have an idea. I think I have an idea that might work. And he wrote, that's when he wrote Blackacre, which is our book at Image. And then through that process with Duffy writing Blackacre and, the process of Image, I remember first getting starting the process with Eric Stevenson and Duffy saying, I don't, what are we even supposed to do here? Like, this just seems so easy. Like, I'm not really sure. And I was like, oh, I better figure out what the hell this means. All of this means. Like, what does this mean? What does this mean? And so I thought, oh, I better start understanding this. If Duffy's going to have a book published, like, I better start understanding how this all works. And then, thank God we had Ed with us. I mean, who Ed has forgotten more about the comic book industry than I will ever know, and and he sort of helped us sort of deal with the business stuff. And his wife, Mel, she pretty much at the time certainly ran all of Ed's business. So at her knee and at Ed's knee, I sort of learned how the industry works. And that's what's so interesting about the comic book industry is that it's so organic to itself. It changes, for good or for worse, because of the people in it. And it really, the customs and practices are really generated by the people in it. It's not sort of some external force pressing on to the industry. And so, learning it from somebody in the industry who knows it so well was absolutely key. And I think that's when I started drawing, parallel to my own experience. That was the beginning of it. And then I was working in the executive office of the big ballet company up in Seattle. And I thought, I really should go back into private practice again. So I took the Washington bar, and in 2010, I passed the Washington bar and opened up private practice. And Ed, at that time, Ed said, hey, do you want to represent me? And I said, yes. And then Ed, of course I do. And then Ed told everyone he knew.
That's
and
awesome.
That's my career. I mean, literally, it's all been word of mouth. To this day, it's word of mouth. But, so it's all really Ed. It's Ed's fault, everyone. Thank you, Ed Brubaker.
He's the patient zero of your story.
Yes, he is. He is client zero. In fact, I call him client zero.
Excellent.
But I, and that, I think it was through that process of first it was, Duffy's own experience. And that was another thing too about being in this community. Like, not only was I, somebody with a skill set that I noticed was really, that people might find of use. But also I was a member of the community, and right. I am a member of the community. Like, I am, somebody who understands what it's like to have freelancer anxiety because I live it. That's my family life. Like
Mm-hmm.
we, all the things that writers and artists are worried about, I can relate, because those are the things that we worry about.
Yeah.
And it also helps me, I think, creatively come up with solutions that, somebody who doesn't understand the industry as well might not come up with, because it's hard to explain to somebody, it's hard to explain to a lawyer who doesn't understand, for example, like how to delicately deal with, the sort of cascade of lateness. If the writer's late, that makes the artist late, that makes the colorist late, that makes the letterer late. Like at some point, the poor letterer, I mean, so, and how do we help the letterer, protect the letterer and the colorist from like lateness from up chain? I mean, it's that kind of thing that, I had to really live it to know how to craft solutions for people that work.
To me, it seemed like you would have to be kind of immersed in it for a bit, because I mean, I feel like I know a lot about the industry, but even beyond that, I probably know nothing compared to you. And like you were saying, like Ed has forgotten more than both of us probably combined know.
For sure.
And you really kind of have to immerse yourself in the industry to know all the intricacies about like, the varying types of deals and how like the intricacies are different between like even like let's say a for hire deal for one company versus another one, or a creator owned deal for one company versus another. And it's funny because like I think most people think in blanket statements, but it's really not that case. So I imagine you had a solid period, or even today you're probably still learning things. You're like, oh man.
Still learning, and also still learning how like best, because I mean also there is a for lack of a better word, there is a troubleshooting or trial and error quality to all contracts. It doesn't matter if it's in comics industry or if it's in the entertainment. It doesn't matter if we're selling widgets. It's all a matter of trial and error. You don't know something is going to be a problem until later on down the road, where all of a sudden some weird convergence of circumstances create a problem. This happens in every industry, and so there is a little bit of what I call, intellectual arbitrage, where you take, things that work in different contexts and try to apply it and just see what happens. And so there's a level of immersion that had to happen in terms of the industry, more so, in the entertainment industry than in a lot of others. I think there is an immersion that has to happen. But also you have to be kind of, the thing I was drawn to in comics is that it was very, there were no standards, there were no customs and practices, there were no, there was just nothing like that. No one had ever had, no one had ever really thought about it before, and it was sort of people signed what was sent to them by a publisher, but what I found, where I really found my value add was for this industry, was not necessarily between the creator and the publisher, that too, but is more among creators. How to make deals among each other,
right?
Between artists, between colorists, to make things clear. And because unlike in other industries, people plan for failure. They say, okay, this relationship, we're entering into this business deal, and we contract for failure. We contract around what happens when things go wrong. And I found in the comic book industry, it was more important to contract around when things go right. When all of a sudden you have a deal, or you have a movie, or you have, that's when people start getting really unclear about what they thought they were getting into. And that's a very different mindset. And it was a challenge for the company, because there's just no one was doing anything the same. And certainly, asking creators, my personal view was I want to develop a system that works for creators that they can read and understand. That was the other piece. But the idea of getting a contract that you can't freaking understand because it's in legalese is so stupid to me. It is so stupid to me, because I'm like, it creates another barrier between you, it's like I'm not being super articulate here, but I guess my thought is it's like when you get something that you don't understand, that you need somebody to interpret for you. To me, that just sounds like job security.
Yeah.
Like, I wanted my contracts to be something that people could immediately understand, and they didn't need to necessarily hire 15 lawyers to translate for them.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, I think, like, the thing that really was driving me and still drives me is I need to learn more. New things come up every day, new scenarios, new relationships, new, the way people want to handle business, and all that stuff. I honestly, there's nothing. There is a degree of repetitiveness, and that's good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to see it. I think that's a good thing. It means that we're finally settling down into a comfortable groove.
Yeah.
But things change, people change. All deals are highly contextual,
mm-hmm.
and so it's important to understand where everybody is coming from
mm-hmm.
when you do those deals, so that everyone gets their needs met.
Yeah.
My view. That's not how everyone feels, but that's how I feel.
How I feel is you definitely said the smartest sounding phrase anybody's ever said on my show when you dropped intellectual arbitrage. So, bravo you. But I did want to say one thing that really stood out to what you were saying was, I've talked to a lot of creators who, when you're new to comics and you are signing your first contract, you kind of feel like an internal pressure of signing that deal, because what if there isn't
mm-hmm.
another deal? What if there isn't something else to follow it? So you feel like you kind of have to do that. But sometimes people walk themselves into tough deals then. I mean, like comic book history is lined with people who have signed deals that they probably shouldn't have if they really thought about it. And I think one thing that's good, that sounds like you're really kind of accomplishing, at least in the background, is some level of transparency, so people are aware of kind of what they're walking themselves into when they are signing these deals.
Yeah, and when we're talking about publishers, like, I would say that in the last decade or so, there's been a real, and it has very little to do with me. I can take credit for one thing in particular, but very little to do with me. But I think it just happened, that I got into this at a time when people were becoming more aware, and the industry was becoming a little bit more aware of how people in that industry were being treated,
mm-hmm.
and how, boy, we really should read our contracts, and boy, we really should figure out what the hell that means. And I think, I don't represent any of those parties, so I can say this, but I think one of the big things was the Watchmen, before Watchmen.
Yep.
When people looked at that contract, or when they looked at the, half the internet says, oh, well, how could they do that? That's Alan Moore's property, and and the other half goes, well, it's not Alan Moore's, and people have all sorts of opinions about it. But the reality is that what DC was doing is taking advantage of language that has been in every one of their contracts.
Right.
And and Alan Moore himself was like, I know you guys can do this, but I really wish you wouldn't do this.
Right.
That's a different story than my rights are being trampled.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it started a really great conversation of, hey guys, you should really start reading the things and understanding what's in contracts that you sign. Because let's be honest, like, we would have all been crushed had Alan Moore walked away from that DC contract and never published Watchmen.
Right.
I mean, think about that. That would be horrible. That would have been a horrible thing. So part of me is sort of like, well, you have to. My goal is to get people to understand what's in their contracts, weigh the benefits and the way the pros and cons,
mm-hmm.
and then sign it with knowledge.
Right.
And I say this to clients all the time. It is perfectly fine to sign a shitty deal if there is nothing we can do to make it not shitty.
Right.
Or we've done the most we can to make it not shitty. But it's perfectly fine if you know the consequences.
Right.
If you know, like, the worst thing for me is to sign something and then 5 years later be like, I really feel stupid for signing that. Nobody that I can confidently say that, like, I don't think any of my clients, since I've been involved with them, will say, oh, that was I should never have signed that. Like, I'm really sorry I signed that. Because we talk about the deals, we get them, I try. There are some things you just can't negotiate. Sometimes, some things, DC, Marvel, like, they just will not change, and that's fine. They don't have to for you. Why should they change it for you? You're just you.
Right.
They have an entire business to run, and they've been running it that same way, whatever. Like, you either take it or don't. But what I find is people feel a lot better about taking that deal, signing that deal, when they know what they're getting. It's the not knowing that people feel dumb about. It's not the deal itself. I mean, so I think that was sort of a shift in the last decade of people being like, oh, we should really know what these mean. And I'm not going to lie. One of my favorite things to do with clients is to say no. I love it. I think people should say no more often. I think they should practice it.
Yeah.
I think they should, no, like, no, just say no. And because and I find this is probably more helpful in the Hollywood context. No. Everyone say it with me at home. No. You have no obligation to option your property to so-and-so producer pimp. Like, you don't have to do that.
Right.
But if we're publishing, I just think there is the you have to always consider, okay, this might not be the most ideal deal, but at this stage in my career, this story, whatever, this is the right deal for this story. This is the right deal for where I'm at right now. And I know that down the road, I'm going to regret signing over 50% of my ownership in this property if a movie is ever made. But it's okay, because I think one of the most valuable things, and I say this all the time to anyone who will listen, but it's one of the most incredible things I think that Ed Brubaker ever said was, if you've only had one good idea, this is not the industry for you.
Right.
So, I think that that's a really important thing to remember. If you have just the one perfect comic, that you better say no a lot. Don't say yes and then regret it, and because you only have the one idea. It's also okay to say, okay, this idea works really well at this publisher. I might not be wild about everything this particular publisher does or everything that their contract says, but this book, this story, these characters, they are, they belong at publisher X. That makes sense to me. It's totally fine. And I just think the most important thing is understanding what the consequences are, again, what you're signing, and knowing what you're getting into. That will go a long way towards making you feel far more empowered, even if the deal isn't so great.
It's funny, the idea of the power of saying no comes up strangely often on my show. I kind of feel like I have like a secondary career coming where I bring people along with me to like speak to large crowds about the power of no, like feel empowered to say no. But I mean,
I love it.
It's very true. It's very true. But I wanted to ask, I mean, this is not me trying to like, tout you and your peers and anything like that. But we're living in a time where comics and all kinds of stories are being optioned like it's candy, because you want to have the next big property. You want to have the next new future media empire and things like that. And like those deals, the deals for the options aren't just like, with the actual like producers and things like that. I mean, that's coming down to the original creator-owned deal that you're making. How important will you say that consulting somebody like yourself or Katie Lane is for a comic creator in this kind of, movie, TV option crazy era?
I think it's really important. I mean, I think that I don't know. I don't think that we're at a place in our industry where people. Let me start here. Let me put it this way. I think it's really important First, because we're talking about big rights.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about potentially big money. We're talking about an industry where I think all told the studios last year, I think literally profit. The studios here in Los Angeles posted a profit of $30 billion.
Right.
That is a lot of money. The publishers, I mean, Disney, or yes, Disney owns Marvel, and yes, Warner Brothers owns DC, but Disney or DC and Marvel by themselves, like, there may be millions, like maybe. But like most of the publishers were talking about relatively small amounts of money and a fairly robust risk that
Right.
the publishers are taking when they're putting comics out there. Now, with TV and film, we're talking about a ginormous amount of money that someone is investing, but also that they seek to make. They wouldn't invest $1 million in something if they weren't going to make $100 million back. That is just the nature of this industry. So when somebody comes to you and says, we want to option your book, all the rights to your book, to make one little TV show, and we're going to pay you the amazing price of X, you need to know what that means.
Right.
And from my perspective, Katie Lane and myself, the other lawyers at my firm, Lee Rosenbaum and Shep Rosenman and Diane Golden, like, there are lawyers we have spent at my firm, Kaz Golden Rosenman. They have spent, and I joined them recently, but they have spent years trying to articulate to this town how comic creators and their properties are different, are unique, are very special.
Right.
Because that's the thing I would say. The reason why you want a lawyer to help you with your comic book property as it goes to TV and film is that comic books are very unique. And they're not like a spec script. They're not even like a novel. They're totally different. And there's a lot of education that goes on, with studios and networks. We spend a lot of time educating them as to the role of the writer, and the artist. Hollywood has made some serious assumptions. And they are, we still have a long way to go to help, reverse the assumption that the artist is simply a storyboard person.
Right.
But because in the early days of when people started paying attention to comics and saying, this could really be as something more than a merchandise tool that, of superheroes, but like stories that could go from, it would be interesting if I could look back and figure out like the first time something went that wasn't a superhero story that went from comic to film or TV. I should look into that because that's really when this all started, when Hollywood was like, well, we don't really know how this fits in with our model, so we're just going to decide. Writer is king and everybody else is, a hired hand. And that's not how our industry is. That's not how most relationships between artist and writer are. And it's a very insulting thing to mostly it's the artist, but it's a very insulting thing to be treated like that. And I think that's another thing. In order to preserve, in order to preserve sort of the uniqueness of the relationship between a writer of a comic book. When we're talking about creator-owned, superhero stuff, that's that's on them. The mistakes that they make are their mistakes on DC and Disney. There's Marvel, DC, they can make their own mistakes. But I'm talking about like creator-owned books, right? Where it's an artist and a writer, and they've come up with this idea and they're selling it. Like it's on us to help inform the network or the studio how that relationship is special and how each of those people can contribute something very unique and how they're both integral to the process. And I think every time we do something that doesn't honor that philosophy, we set ourselves back.
Yeah.
So, you do need, this is the other thing too. I mean, I feel like with image books in particular, every time there's an image book comes out, there's like 50 producers call that create those creators and say, we want to, take your book out, option it for free, which is silly, and, take it and show it around town and da-da-da. And everyone's like, oh, should I do this? I mean, and some of them could be legit. Most of them are not.
Mm-hmm.
And, the reality is that the thing, you're putting a thing out into the world, there's no shelf life.
Right.
I mean, it's out in the world. Like, you don't have to say yes to everything. And like I said before, saying no, if a producer or somebody comes to you and says, we're going to option we want to option your book, and, these are the terms, and, the artist, sure. What's his name? You can say no.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that our community says no and only says yes to those deals that honor the thing that makes us great and special and unique, the better off we are.
Yeah.
So until people can say that on their own, I always think you need a lawyer, because I know how hard this job is. I am not a comic book artist. I am not a comic book writer. I know how hard that job is. So everyone has their own job. I'm not saying at some point, no one needs a lawyer. That would be silly. Not just, I guess maybe it is a little bit of job security. But hey, fine. If y'all don't need me, it's cool. I'll just go retire for the second time in my life. It's fine. It's cool. It's like, well, I'm going to shut it down, just shut the lights off. Fine, you guys don't need me anymore. But it is important until, it really is important as a community that we that we show our value. We continue to show our value to people who are coming in and trying to make things out of our stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's important that we always meet the philosophy that we are unique and we have value.
I think
if that answers your question. I don't know if I answered your question.
Oh, it totally does. But I think one of the interesting things about all of this, and we've already kind of talked about this to a degree, is, this probably isn't the case for the creator side of things, but I think to a certain degree, the public perception of these deals is that they're handled with a past tense. You talk about Watchmen, like before Watchmen was a big deal that happened at like 2008, 2007, somewhere around there. I don't even remember. It might have been even more recent. But I mean, that was, from a deal that was signed in probably 1985. And these deals are still happening today. I mean, like every deal could be a bad deal. And I think that it's something that every...
That's a great point.
What's that?
I think that's a great point. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, and I think that's something that, like, especially if you're, a budding creator who has, like, let's say it's a budding creator that has a bunch of ideas, but one of those ideas is truly, $1 million idea, so to speak. You have to value what you're doing enough to realize that somebody else is going to come for that and try to find a good deal for it, and good deal for them, not necessarily for you. So you have to be conscious of the fact that you have to protect yourself, and that's where people like you and Katie come in.
Yeah, and what makes a good deal? Like, and I think it's okay. One of the nice things about our industry too is that creators talk.
Right.
Like publishers hate it when you guys talk to each other.
But you should.
Talk to each other, and I mean, come on. Like, it's a very it is, to know what a good deal is important. To have, if you can't talk to each other, because sometimes people aren't supposed to talk about their page rates, and they're not, and yeah, that's in their deals. They're not. It's confidentiality. They're not supposed to talk about it. But what you can do is talk to somebody, like someone like Katie, like me, like Shep and Lee, who do this regularly, and we can say, no, man, that's a bad deal.
Yeah.
Or we can say, no, man, that's a bad deal. Here's how we're going to counter.
Right.
A lot of people also don't understand that this is a negotiation. That every time you receive a contract and it's not signed, that means it's still, some things are still open, and you only know what's negotiable if you ask.
Right.
And I have now been a lawyer for 11 years. I have never in my entire life had somebody send me a contract for the first draft, like, here's the contract, how's it look? And me come back with comments and then say, to hell with you. We're taking this off the table. That has never happened.
Mm-hmm.
All they do is say, no, we can't do that. Or, yeah, we can do this. Or, no, we can't do this, but how about this?
Mm-hmm.
that's the whole purpose. And if you don't ask, you never know. And I think it's really hard as a young creator to know what your worth is. But you don't have to know everything going in. You have to have a good team.
Mm-hmm.
Get a good lawyer. Get a good rabbi who, like I call Ed. Get a rabbi. Get somebody like Matt. Call Matt Fraction. Be
Mm-hmm.
like, hey Matt, what do you think? I mean, this is what's so amazing about our community. Like, there's so much. You have accessibility. Twitter, which I think is a rotting cesspool of crap. There are some actual good things about Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them is access to creators when they invite you to have access. And some don't, but
Right.
some have Tumblr feeds. They're like, ask me anything. Instead of asking them questions about what happened to Gambit in issue 600 and blah, 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 what happened to the thing he threw. Instead of asking that question, which, fine, ask that question. I don't care. Fine.
I might ask that question, to be totally honest.
You might ask the question. Yeah. I mean, but instead of that question, or maybe on top of that question, ask them, like, hey, like, what do I do here? That you'd be surprised how much, creators are really willing to talk to people and to talk about their own experience and to help the next generation, be stronger. I mean, there are jerks in our industry, no question. But I find, on balance, the comic book industry is so full of people who they really are a great community, and they want to help you understand. They want to help the next generation. They will extend a helping hand. Ultimately, you have to help yourself. But find somebody who does know and ask that question. And to your point about, the deals that were made, I mean, like, I think Watchmen might have been in the 70s. Like, no, it's also kind of an embarrassment of, like, it's a great problem to have to, in 2008, be talking about the future of a book that was first published in the 70s.
Right.
That also doesn't happen much. So, like, there are unique, like I said before, there are unique problems that come up all the time because something's a major hit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a great problem to have. And a lot more common, people have a great idea. It's not executed as well as they want it to be executed, and it sort of goes into obscurity.
Mm-hmm.
We have experience with that too. Like, what do you do when that happens? If it's happened before, someone will happily tell you about it in this industry. And I think that that's one of our strengths. Like I said, there are so many creators that put themselves out there as, like, as mentors. Take it.
Mm-hmm.
Take that. If you are a creator, take that opportunity. Maybe not in line at the convention, but, like, on the creator's terms, on that person's terms. So many people have those kinds of forums where they say, ask me anything.
Yeah.
Take advantage of it.
I think that's to back up what you're saying. One of the questions I get the most is, how do I end up talking to the people I do? Like, how do you line these people up? It seems crazy. I'm like, it's pretty easy. You just ask. For the most, I mean, like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? They're going to say no. I'm like, I can survive somebody saying no. It's not so bad. But I mean, like, take Ed, for example. He has his newsletter and he answers questions every single time. And a lot of times they have, like, literally nothing to do with Spider-Man or Captain America or whatever. It's him asking, like, big question or answering big questions about how he works and how he operates. And anybody can be just an email or a Tumblr away in 2017, and it's a really amazing thing.
I mean, I feel like if you're a female creator, artist, writer,
sure,
whatever, female, or you identify as female, and you don't have Kelly Sue DeConnick
right
on every social media feed that you have, and, like, actively engage with her in the way that she wants to be, the way that she invites people to engage with her, then you're in your own way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's done more for this industry as a woman, as a creator. To hell with her gender. She's done more as a creator than a lot of her peers, and I think that that's something, like, I just don't. To me, I'm just like, if you are in an industry that has a Kelly Sue, you're in good shape.
Yeah.
Because there was nobody like Kelly Sue when Kelly Sue was coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And, there are people that have, especially now, like I said, there has been a real shift in the last decade of, in the comic book industry, of awareness
Mm-hmm.
and like how we treat each other, how we allow publishers to treat us,
Right.
how we allow the rest of the world who want to exploit our work, how we allow them, what do we do when they want to exploit it, how we approach that. There has been a lot more, I think, examination in the last 10 years than there ever has been, at least on a public stage,
Mm-hmm.
where people are actually actively talking about it, and not just talking, but doing.
Right.
If there is somebody listening to this podcast that is not necessarily a creator, but loves comics, and you have a skill, like you're an accountant, you're a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
you're a manager, you're any of those things, and you want to get into comics, there is room for you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do it. Because there's really, when I think about, the number of lawyers that do the work that we do, it's so small.
Right.
And it shouldn't be. There's plenty of room. And, I really think the next, if you want my opinion, I think the future thing, the next big frontier for comics is going to be people to assist with managing and marketing,
Mm-hmm.
and accounting. People who, just like with TV and film, a lot of the creators in TV and film need somebody to help them manage their business, to help them manage, their branding and self-marketing, and also their money.
Right.
Like, that's something that comics, we don't have a lot of those people servicing our industry, and there's room. There's a way, if you want to be involved and do stuff like that, there's a way to be involved without having to be a creator. And if you don't want to be a lawyer, don't be a lawyer. But God knows, it's not easy. But like there are a lot more jobs out there that I think as an industry we could definitely use. Marketing in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Creators have to be, they have to know so much about marketing. And I'm sorry, I don't know shit about marketing.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing that I thought at 23. How do I've never done that before. But all of a sudden, when you're a comics creator and you have your first book coming out at Image, you need to know how to be an effective marketer.
Yeah.
You need to know how to manage your social media presence in a way that how would you know that? How would you know how to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And, you see people fail, or books fail, or not do as well as they could do because they just didn't have a great marketing, they didn't know how to get people to read them and get through the noise of the next big event at Marvel and DC.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it all has to happen before. But, it's hard to get to be heard through that noise. And that's too bad. That's really too bad. And it would be great, I think, if we had, if there was a sector of our industry that, helps people with marketing. I think that would be awesome.
It's funny. I've actually said the same thing because you look at the marketing side of things, and it just managing kind of like the relationships with retailers and with like media and all kinds of things like that. That's a full-time job on top of having to draw a comic and maybe draw covers on the side or do commissions that you have a list from 2012 that you have to still complete. I mean, all these different things are so time consuming, and it's like, where do you have time to even respond to emails or tweets or whatever? And it's staggering.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that people do exist in those roles already, both for publishers and independent, but at the same time, I agree entirely. I think that is a huge place that especially in the creator-owned part of the world, that could be built up.
Yeah, and like with the creator-owned part, you just hit on exactly, I think, what sort of the dynamic of a relationship in a creator-owned space between the writer and the artist, because it takes the writer so much less time to write one page of a comic than it takes the artist to draw it. Mm-hmm. The writer then, naturally takes on, all of the marketing, dealing with the publisher, dealing with a lawyer if they have one, dealing with social media, doing all of the stuff, that extra stuff that needs to be done for a creator-owned book, because you want the artist to be like focused and like distraction free.
Right.
So the writer tends to be the one doing all of that work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as I said previously, I think that the trouble is that the impression that has given the outside world is that the writer is the boss.
Yeah.
And in some cases, that is probably true. I mean, that's just totally contextual of like what depends on the book.
Yeah.
But
and
like,
it depends on the artist too.
Usually the case. Yeah, that's not usually the case. And so because the writer has to take on all of those things, the outside perception is that they're the boss. But also think about what that means for a writer. If you're a writer in the comic book industry, if you're sitting here listening to this and you are a writer, know that once you write a comic book, you will become a manager, you will become a marketer, the PR person. You will have to do all of these things and do them really well because the future of your book depends on it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of responsibility, and it's a skill set that, frankly, most people don't have doing any job.
Right.
Like, you have to go and, like, all of the things I just described are someone's real job. Like, there are people out there who that's their entire job is to do, PR. But you, as the writer of a comic book, have to do that for everyone, and it's an insane amount of pressure for the writer, because if they don't do it as well, or they don't know what they're doing, or they don't do something as well as they could, and hindsight's 20/20 and yada yada yada, that's a lot of pressure, and
right.
It can be it can be crushing, and it can also crush the enjoyment, of doing comics. It can really crush that enjoyment out of a writer. And I'm speaking with, from experience with that. Like, so many writers say, like, fuck, I just can't do another book.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't. I don't know how people manage more than one book, because there's just so much to do, and, like, I don't have time to write, and I can only barely write the issues I can write. How can you do more than one? I mean, you do see why people are drawn to doing work for hire projects, because at least they just get paid.
Yeah.
They just get paid to write, and that's it. So, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like that's, again, back to sort of the bigger theme. It's something I totally get about the comic book industry that I experienced as a dancer.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't just dance. I couldn't just learn choreography and perform. I had to be good at all these other things. And I wanted to be. I just didn't know what I didn't know. And then I didn't even know how to begin to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's what put me on this path. But that's a real thing. It's a real feeling when you're an artist and you're trying to make art for a living.
Mm-hmm.
It's the living part that is really a challenge.
Yeah.
It's a skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. But Caitlin, that's actually all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on and talking. This was fantastic. This is everything I hoped it could be and more.
My pleasure. I really appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with comics lawyer Caitlin DiMotta. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched. That's SKTCHD. Follow it on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating and review while you're at it. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from their album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen, as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.